Marcus wiped down the last table near the window and glanced at his watch. 7:30 in the morning meant the usual rush would start soon. The Sunrise Cafe had been his second home for the past 3 years, ever since he'd taken the job as assistant manager. He knew every regular customer by name, their usual orders, and their little quirks. Some wanted their coffee black, others needed 3 sugars and a splash of cream. Mrs. Henderson always asked for extra napkins, and Mr. Rodriguez liked his newspaper folded just so when he picked up his morning latte. The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see Sarah walking in. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown for the past 8 months since starting work here. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore the cafe's standard uniform of khaki pants and a green polo shirt. What caught his attention, though, was something different about her face. "Morning, Sarah," Marcus called out as she tied her apron around her waist. "You're a few minutes early today." She glanced up briefly, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Traffic was lighter than usual. Marcus noticed she kept her head tilted slightly to the left, and when she moved toward the coffee machine, the morning light from the window illuminated the right side of her face. There, along her jawline, was a purple-blue mark that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. He'd worked the closing shift with her just 14 hours ago, and her face had been clear then. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, stepping closer. "That looks like it might hurt." Her hand immediately flew to her jaw, and she turned away from the window. "Oh, this? I'm so clumsy. Walked right into my bathroom door in the dark last night. You know how it is when you get up for water and don't want to turn on the lights." Marcus had heard that explanation before, not from Sarah, but from his sister Jessica years ago. Jessica had used similar stories about doors, stairs, and her own clumsiness to explain away the marks that appeared with increasing frequency during her marriage to Derek. The memory made his stomach tighten. "That must have been some door," he said carefully, not wanting to push too hard. "Maybe you should put some ice on it when you get a chance." "I did already," Sarah replied quickly, busying herself with checking the coffee filters. "It's fine, really. Just embarrassing, you know." The morning rush began in earnest around 8 o'clock. Sarah moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, taking orders, preparing drinks, and handling the cash register. Marcus watched her interactions with customers, noting how she kept her bruised side turned away from them whenever possible. When someone did notice and comment, she repeated the same story about the bathroom door. Mrs. Chun, one of their oldest regulars, studied Sarah's face with concern. "Dear, that's quite a bruise. Are you sure you're all right?" "Just clumsy," Sarah said with a laugh that sounded forced. "My husband always says I'd trip over my own shadow if it wasn't attached." The comment about her husband made Marcus pay closer attention. In 8 months of working together, Sarah had rarely mentioned her husband beyond casual references. She didn't wear a wedding ring, which Marcus had always found odd, and she never talked about weekend plans that included anyone else. Most of their other co-workers shared stories about their families, their dates, their social lives. Sarah kept those details private. During a brief lull around 10 o'clock, Marcus found himself working alongside Sarah as they restocked supplies. "How long have you been married?" he asked, trying to sound casual. 3 years next month," she replied, focusing intently on arranging pastries in the display case. "That's nice. What does your husband do?" Sarah's movements became more deliberate, and she took a long pause before answering. "He's in construction. Steady work, good benefits." Marcus nodded, but something about her tone suggested the conversation was making her uncomfortable. He decided to let it drop for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The bruise, the defensive posture, the reluctance to discuss her home life. It all reminded him too much of Jessica's situation. The lunch crowd brought a different energy to the cafe. Sarah seemed to relax a bit during the busier periods, perhaps finding comfort in the constant activity and interaction with customers. She was good at her job, Marcus had to admit. Customers liked her, and she never made mistakes with orders. But he noticed she frequently checked the clock, and as the afternoon wore on, she seemed to grow more tense. Around 3 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus saw her face go pale as she read it, and her hand instinctively went to her jaw. She quickly deleted the message and slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just my husband asking about dinner plans." But Marcus had seen enough text exchanges to know that normal dinner planning didn't usually make someone look frightened. He made a mental note to keep an eye on things. As the afternoon shift continued, Marcus found opportunities to observe Sarah more closely. He noticed that she was careful about how she moved, almost like someone who was sore or trying to avoid aggravating an injury. When she reached up to get supplies from high shelves, she moved slowly and deliberately. When she bent down to restock lower cabinets, she winced slightly. Around 4:30, a regular customer named Tom came in for his usual afternoon coffee. Tom was a friendly guy in his 50s who worked at the bank down the street and always had a joke or story to share. Today, he took
Are
one
you
look at
sure
Sarah
you're
and
okay?
his
It's
expression grew
nothing, really.
serious.
That doesn't look
"Sarah,
like nothing.
what happened to your
I
face?"
just need to go.
he asked with genuine concern. Before she could answer, Marcus stepped forward. "She had a little accident at home last night. Bathroom door got the better of her." Tom's eyebrows raised slightly, and he looked between Marcus and Sarah. "That's got to be the toughest bathroom door in town," he said quietly. Sarah's cheeks flushed, and she busied herself preparing Tom's coffee. Marcus appreciated that Tom didn't push the issue, but the exchange left an uncomfortable tension in the air. As closing time approached, Marcus noticed Sarah becoming increasingly anxious. She checked her phone frequently and kept glancing at the clock. When a customer lingered past their normal closing time, Sarah's agitation became more obvious. "We really need to get things cleaned up," she said to Marcus, her voice tight with stress. "Don't worry," Marcus replied. "We'll get you out of here on time." At exactly 6 o'clock, Sarah had her apron off and was heading for the door. "See you tomorrow," she called over her shoulder. Marcus watched through the window as she hurried to her car, an older sedan parked at the far end of the lot. She kept checking over her shoulder as she walked, like someone expecting to be followed. As she drove away, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed someone rushing home to face something unpleasant. That evening, Marcus found himself thinking about Jessica again. He remembered the gradual changes in her behavior during her marriage to Derek. The increasing isolation, the defensive explanations for injuries, the way she became more and more careful about everything she said and did. He remembered feeling helpless, wanting to intervene, but not knowing how. Jessica had insisted everything was fine, even when it clearly wasn't. The difference was that Marcus had been Jessica's brother, with a family connection that gave him some standing to ask difficult questions. With Sarah, he was just a coworker and supervisor. The boundaries were different, and he had to be more careful about how he approached the situation. But he couldn't ignore what he'd seen. The bruise on Sarah's jaw was fresh and significant. Her explanations didn't quite add up, and her behavior suggested someone living under stress. Marcus had learned enough from Jessica's experience to recognize the warning signs. He decided to do some research that evening. He looked up information about domestic violence, signs to watch for, and resources available for victims. What he read confirmed his suspicions about Sarah's situation. The patterns were all there: the isolation, the defensive explanations for injuries, the fear of being late or causing displeasure, the reluctance to discuss home life. Marcus also found information about how coworkers and friends could help in these situations. The advice emphasized the importance of being supportive without being pushy, offering resources without forcing someone to use them, and maintaining trust while encouraging someone to seek help. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work early and spent some time thinking about how to approach Sarah. He couldn't directly accuse her husband of abuse based on one bruise and some behavioral observations, but he could make sure Sarah knew that she had support available if she needed it. When Sarah arrived for work, the bruise on her jaw was more prominent than the day before. She tried to cover it with makeup, but the purple coloring showed through. She moved even more carefully than she had yesterday, and Marcus wondered what else had happened after she left work. "Good morning," he said gently. "How are you feeling today?" Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus developed a routine of careful observation. He arrived early each morning to prepare the cafe and position himself to see Sarah when she walked in. What he discovered troubled him more each day. The bruise on her jaw faded slowly, leaving a yellowish mark that lingered for over a week. But more concerning were the new signs that appeared during that time. On Wednesday, Sarah wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm October weather. When she rolled up her sleeves to wash dishes, Marcus caught a glimpse of finger-shaped marks around her wrist. She pulled the sleeves down quickly when she noticed him looking. On Friday, she walked with a slight limp and seemed reluctant to carry heavy trays. When a customer dropped a cup and it shattered near her feet, Sarah flinched so dramatically that everyone in the cafe noticed. Her reaction was far out of proportion to the minor incident. The following Monday brought the most obvious sign yet. Sarah wore a scarf wrapped high around her neck, even though the autumn weather was mild. Throughout the morning, she tugged at it self-consciously, making sure it stayed in place. During the lunch rush, when the cafe grew warm from the crowd and the kitchen heat, she still refused to remove it. Marcus found an opportunity to speak privately with Sarah during the afternoon lull. They were restocking supplies in the back storage room when he decided to try a different approach. "Sarah, I want you to know that if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here," he said carefully. "Sometimes work can be a good distraction from problems at home. But if those problems follow you here, it affects your safety and well-being." Sarah stopped arranging coffee filters and turned to face him. For a moment, he thought she might open up. Her eyes showed a vulnerability that she usually kept hidden. "I appreciate that, Marcus, really. But everything's fine at home. David and I are just going through a rough patch. All couples do." It was the first time she'd mentioned her husband's name. Marcus filed that information away while considering his response. "Rough patches are normal," he agreed. "But they shouldn't leave physical marks or make you afraid to go home." Sarah's face immediately closed off, and she turned back to her work. "I don't know what you're implying, but you're wrong. David loves me.
Are
He's
you
just
okay?
been under a lot
That
of
looks
stress at work
serious.
lately.
It's
The
nothing. What
construction
about you?
industry is competitive, and he's worried about layoffs." Marcus recognized the defensive tone. Jessica had used similar language to justify Derek's behavior. The rationalization, the blame on external stressors, the insistence that love was present despite evidence to the contrary. It all followed a predictable pattern. "I understand work stress can affect relationships," Marcus said carefully. "But there are healthy ways to deal with stress and unhealthy ways. If David is taking his work problems out on you physically, that's not something you have to accept." "He's not taking anything out on me," Sarah said sharply. "You're making assumptions based on a couple of clumsy accidents. I told you I walked into a door. I also fell down the stairs last week and bruised my ribs. I'm just not very coordinated." Marcus felt his heart sink. Sarah was now claiming multiple injuries, each explained by her own clumsiness. The stories were becoming more elaborate and less believable. "Sarah, please don't," she interrupted. "I know you mean well, but you're wrong about this. My marriage isn't perfect, but whose is? David and I are working things out, and I don't need interference from people who don't understand the situation." Marcus backed off, realizing he'd pushed too hard too fast. But the conversation had revealed important information. Sarah's husband was named David, worked in construction, and was apparently under work-related stress. More importantly, Sarah was now aware that Marcus suspected domestic violence, which could either help or hurt the situation depending on how she processed it. That evening, Marcus called his sister Jessica. She'd been free from Derek for 5 years now, remarried to a kind man named Patrick, and had rebuilt her life. But she still carried the wisdom of someone who'd survived an abusive relationship. "I need advice," Marcus told her. "There's a coworker who I think is being abused, but she's not ready to admit it or accept help." Jessica listened as Marcus described Sarah's situation, the physical signs, the behavioral changes, and their conversation that afternoon. "It sounds very familiar," Jessica said when he finished. The defensive attitude, the elaborate explanations, the insistence that it's just a rough patch. "I remember feeling like I had to protect Derek's reputation even when he was hurting me." "What made you finally realize you needed help?" "It wasn't one thing," Jessica replied thoughtfully. "It was a combination of factors building up over time. The abuse escalating, friends expressing concern, seeing other women in similar situations, and gradually understanding that what was happening wasn't normal or my fault. Is there anything I could have done differently back then?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "You tried to help, Marcus. I wasn't ready to hear it. What would have helped more was knowing that support would be available when I was ready for it." Sometimes it takes time for victims to reach that point. So what should I do with Sarah? Be patient. Don't push too hard, because that might drive her away or even make her situation at home worse if her husband finds out people are asking questions. But let her know, in subtle ways, that resources exist and that you'll be there when she's ready. Marcus thanked his sister and spent the rest of the evening researching local domestic violence resources. He found several organizations in their city that offered help to victims, including a 24-hour hotline, emergency shelter services, legal aid, and counseling programs. He also discovered that their state had specific laws protecting victims of domestic violence, including provisions for restraining orders and workplace accommodations. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work with a plan. He would continue observing and documenting what he saw, but he would also begin creating opportunities for Sarah to access help if she chose to. He couldn't force her to leave her abusive situation, but he could make sure she knew help was available. Sarah arrived for work wearing makeup that was heavier than usual, particularly around her left eye. She moved carefully, like someone trying not to aggravate soreness or pain. When she smiled at customers, it looked forced and didn't reach her eyes. During the morning rush, Marcus noticed that Sarah startled easily at loud noises. The espresso machine's hiss, plates clanging in the dish bin, or customers speaking loudly. Each sudden sound made her jump slightly and look around nervously. It was the behavior of someone living in a constant state of alert. Around 10 o'clock, the cafe's internet went down temporarily. While they waited for the service to be restored, Marcus used the opportunity to engage Sarah in casual conversation. "It's frustrating when technology fails us," he said, adjusting the malfunctioning router. "Makes you realize how much we depend on being connected." "I don't mind it," Sarah replied, wiping down tables with more vigor than necessary. "Sometimes it's nice to have a break from being reachable all the time." Marcus caught the subtle reference to being reachable and wondered if Sarah's husband was the type to check up on her throughout the day. Many abusers use technology to monitor and control their victims. "Do you have one of those husbands who texts constantly during the day?" Marcus asked with forced lightness. Sarah's cleaning motion paused briefly. "David likes to know how my day is going. He worries about me working with the public, you know? There are all kinds of people who come in here, and he wants to make sure I'm safe." Marcus recognized the language pattern, describing controlling behavior as protection and concern. That's thoughtful of him, though I imagine it can be distracting to get frequent messages while you're trying to work. "It's fine," Sarah said quickly. "I don't mind." But Marcus had noticed that Sarah checked her phone constantly throughout each shift, and her expression often grew tense after reading messages. Whatever David was texting wasn't making her feel loved or protected. The internet came back online, and the morning routine resumed. Marcus continued his observations while serving customers and managing the daily operations. He noticed that Sarah had developed subtle strategies for hiding signs of abuse, standing in certain positions relative to the light, using her hair to partially cover her face, wearing clothing that concealed marks on her arms and neck. Around noon, a woman came in whom Marcus didn't recognize. She was well-dressed, probably in her 40s, and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to professional environments. She ordered a coffee and a sandwich, then sat at a table near the counter where she could observe the staff. Marcus thought nothing of it until he noticed the woman watching Sarah specifically. When Sarah went to deliver food to another table, the woman's eyes followed her movement. When Sarah returned to the counter, the woman studied her face and posture with obvious interest. After finishing her meal, the woman approached the counter. "Excuse me," she said to Sarah. "I'm Dr. Martinez from the family medicine clinic down the street. I couldn't help but notice what appears to be some recent bruising around your eye. Are you all right?" Sarah's face went white, and she instinctively touched her left eye where the heavy makeup covered what Marcus now realized was probably a black eye. "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly. "Just clumsy. I walked into a cabinet door yesterday morning." Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. "Cabinet doors can certainly be dangerous. If you'd like, I could take a look and make sure there's no serious damage. Sometimes injuries to the eye area can be more significant than they appear." "That's very kind, but it's really not necessary," Sarah replied, her voice strained. "It's just a minor bruise." "Of course, but If you change your mind, or if you ever need medical attention for any reason, our clinic offers confidential services. We understand that sometimes people need health care in sensitive situations. Dr. Martinez handed Sarah a business card, which Sarah accepted reluctantly. Thank you, but I have a regular doctor. I'm sure you do, but sometimes it helps to know there are options available when you need them. Dr. Martinez smiled warmly and left the cafe. Marcus watched Sarah stare at the business card for a long moment before quickly putting it in her pocket. The encounter with Dr. Martinez had clearly shaken her, probably because it represented the first time a stranger had directly acknowledged what Sarah was trying to hide. For the rest of the afternoon, Sarah was quieter than usual. She went through the motions of her job efficiently, but Marcus could see her mind was elsewhere. She kept touching the pocket where she'd put Dr. Martinez's business card, as if reassuring herself it was still there. During a quiet moment, Marcus approached her carefully. That doctor seemed nice. I suppose, Sarah replied without looking up from the register she was cleaning. It's good to know there are medical professionals who understand that people sometimes need help in difficult situations. Sarah's hands stilled on the register keys. What do you mean? I mean that some doctors are trained to recognize signs of domestic violence and know how to help victims access resources safely. Sarah's head snapped up, and she looked directly at Marcus for the first time in days. Her eyes showed a mixture of fear, anger, and something that might have been relief. I told you before, that's not what this is, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. I heard what you told me, Marcus replied gently, but I also see what I see, and what I see is someone who's hurting and trying to hide it. Sarah looked around the cafe to make sure no customers were listening, then stepped closer to Marcus. Even if you were right, which you're not, what would you expect me to do? Walk away from my marriage because of a few bruises? I'd expect you to prioritize your safety and well-being, Marcus said quietly. And I want you to know that there are people and organizations who can help you do that safely. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her internal struggle. Part of her wanted to maintain the fiction that everything was normal, while another part seemed desperate to tell someone the truth. It's complicated, she finally said. Most difficult situations are complicated, Marcus agreed. But complexity doesn't mean there aren't solutions. Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and a group of customers entered. The moment passed, and Sarah returned to work mode, but something had shifted between them. Marcus sensed that Sarah was beginning to consider the possibility that her situation might not be something she had to endure alone. As the day ended and Sarah prepared to leave, Marcus made a decision. Sarah, I want you to have this, he said, handing her a small piece of paper. It's the number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They're available 24 hours a day, and all calls are confidential. Sarah looked at the paper but didn't take it immediately. Marcus, you don't have to use it, he said quickly. But if you ever wanted, the third week brought a disturbing escalation in Sarah's condition. Marcus arrived at work Monday morning to find her already there, sitting in her car in the parking lot with the engine running. She'd been scheduled to start at 8, but it was only 7:15. When she saw him, she quickly turned off the car and got out, moving stiffly. You're early today, Marcus observed as they walked toward the cafe entrance together. Couldn't sleep, Sarah replied, avoiding eye contact. Figured I might as well come in and get started. Under the parking lot's fluorescent lights, Marcus could see that Sarah's makeup was more elaborate than usual, but it couldn't entirely hide what appeared to be swelling around her left cheekbone. She wore a turtleneck sweater despite the fact that the weather forecast called for temperatures in the 70s. As they opened the cafe and began the morning prep routine, Marcus noticed that Sarah favored her right side and seemed reluctant to reach overhead or bend down. When she thought he wasn't looking, she pressed her hand against her ribs and winced. Sarah, are you hurt? Marcus asked directly. Just sore from gardening this weekend, she said quickly. David and I spent Saturday working in the yard, moving plants and digging up flower beds. I'm not used to that kind of physical labor. Marcus had heard enough creative explanations to recognize another fabrication. That sounds like a big project. What kind of plants were you moving? Sarah paused, clearly caught off guard by the follow-up question. Oh, just regular plants. Bushes and things. David knows more about gardening than I do. The vague response confirmed Marcus's suspicion that there had been no gardening project. Sarah was running out of believable explanations for her injuries, and the stories were becoming more desperate. Throughout the morning rush, Marcus observed Sarah's interactions with customers. She smiled and took orders efficiently, but her movements were careful and deliberate. When she had to carry heavy trays or reach for supplies, she moved like someone in pain, trying not to show it. Around 10:30, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus watched her face pale as she read it, and her hand immediately went to her ribs. She typed back quickly, deleted the conversation thread, and put the phone away. But for the next hour, she checked it constantly and grew increasingly agitated. During the lunch lull, Marcus decided to try a different approach. Instead of asking about her injuries directly, he would focus on her emotional well-being and see if that opened a door to honest conversation. "You seem stressed lately," he said as they worked together restocking napkin dispensers. "Is everything okay?" Sarah glanced around to make sure they were alone, then spoke quietly. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If someone you cared about was in a bad situation, but they kept insisting they could handle it themselves, what would you do?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was the first time Sarah had asked him anything personal or seemed to consider that she might need help. "I guess it would depend on how bad the situation was and whether the person was in danger." "But what if they said they weren't in danger? What if they said it was just temporary and that things would get better soon?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I think sometimes people minimize dangerous situations because admitting how bad things are feels overwhelming. And sometimes people stay in bad situations because leaving seems even scarier." Sarah nodded slowly, processing his response. What if the person was afraid that asking for help would make things worse? "That's a common fear," Marcus said gently. "But there are people trained to help in those situations, people who know how to provide assistance without making things worse." "Like who?" Marcus felt hopeful that Sarah was finally asking the right questions. "Domestic violence counselors, for one. They understand how these situations work and how to help people stay safe while they figure out their options." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Hypothetically, how would someone contact those counselors?" "Remember that hotline number I gave you last week? That's one way. There are also local organizations that offer services. Some even have advocates who can help with safety planning and legal issues." "Safety planning?" "It's a way to think through how to stay as safe as possible, whether someone decides to stay in their current situation or leave it. It covers things like having important documents ready, knowing where to go in an emergency, having a support system in place." Sarah absorbed this information silently. Marcus could see her considering the possibilities, weighing her options against her fears. "This is all hypothetical, of course," Sarah said finally. "Of course," Marcus agreed, understanding that she needed to maintain some emotional distance while processing the information. Their conversation was interrupted by the afternoon rush, but Marcus felt encouraged by Sarah's questions. She was finally thinking about seeking help, even if she wasn't ready to admit that she needed it. Wednesday brought a new development that changed everything. Sarah arrived at work with her left arm in a sling, claiming she'd fallen down the basement stairs at home while doing laundry. The explanation was detailed and rehearsed sounding, complete with specifics about tripping over a basket of clothes and landing awkwardly on the concrete floor. But what concerned Marcus more than the injury itself was Sarah's emotional state. She seemed disconnected and distracted, going through the motions of work without her usual attention to detail. She made several mistakes with customer orders, something that had never happened before. When Marcus corrected her gently, she apologized profusely and seemed on the verge of tears. Around noon, Dr. Martinez returned to the cafe. She took one look at Sarah's sling and approached the counter with obvious concern. "What happened to your arm?" she asked directly. "I fell down the stairs," Sarah replied automatically. "Clumsy me. That's concerning. Did you have it properly examined?" Arm injuries can be tricky, especially if there's nerve damage or if bones aren't aligned correctly. "It's just a sprain," Sarah said quickly. "It'll heal on its own." Dr. Martinez studied Sarah's face and posture for a moment. "Would you be willing to let me take a quick look? I'm concerned about the mechanism of injury and want to make sure you're not dealing with something more serious." Sarah glanced nervously at Marcus, Then, back at Dr. Martinez. I don't think that's necessary. It would just take a few minutes, and there would be no charge. I have my medical bag in my car. Really, I'm fine. Dr. Martinez nodded, but didn't give up. Sarah, I want you to know that if you ever need medical care in a confidential setting, my clinic is available to you. We don't require insurance verification for emergency visits, and we're trained to handle situations where patients need extra privacy and support. The emphasis on confidentiality and privacy was clearly intentional. Sarah understood the implication and looked uncomfortable. Thank you, but I have a regular doctor. After Dr. Martinez left, Sarah seemed more agitated than before. She kept touching her sling and checking her phone. When it rang around 2 o'clock, she answered it quickly and stepped into the back room. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he could hear the tone. Sarah's voice was apologetic and pleading. When she returned to the front of the cafe, her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. Everything all right? Marcus asked. David's coming to pick me up early today, Sarah said, avoiding eye contact. He wants to take me to see a doctor about my arm. Marcus felt a chill of concern. That's good that he's concerned about your injury. Yes, Sarah said, but her voice was flat and emotionless. 20 minutes later, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Marcus watched through the window as a man got out and walked toward the cafe entrance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and an aggressive stride. When he pushed through the door, his eyes immediately found Sarah. Ready to go? He asked, though it sounded more like a command than a question. Almost, Sarah replied, quickly untying her apron with her good hand. Just let me get my things. Sarah, this is my husband, David, she said to Marcus, her voice carefully controlled. David, this is Marcus, my supervisor. David looked Marcus up and down with obvious evaluation. So you're the one who's been asking my wife personal questions. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Sarah had told David about their conversations, either voluntarily or under pressure. I'm just concerned about Sarah's well-being, Marcus replied carefully. When employees get injured, it affects workplace safety. My wife's well-being is my responsibility, David said, his voice carrying a clear warning. I don't need some cafe manager interfering in my marriage. Of course, Marcus said, recognizing that arguing would only make things worse for Sarah. I hope the doctor visit goes well. David's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond. He turned to Sarah. Let's go. Sarah gathered her purse and jacket, moving quickly to avoid keeping David waiting. As they walked toward the door, Marcus noticed how David positioned himself, not quite touching Sarah, but close enough to control her movement. See you tomorrow, Sarah, Marcus called out. She turned back briefly, and in that moment, Marcus saw something in her eyes that looked like goodbye. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Sarah might not be coming back tomorrow. After they left, Marcus stood at the window watching David's truck disappear down the street. He felt sick with worry and guilt. Had his attempts to help Sarah actually made her situation worse? Had David's confrontational attitude been a warning about what would happen to Sarah when they got home? Marcus spent the rest of his shift thinking about what to do. He couldn't call the police based on suspicions alone, and Sarah hadn't explicitly asked for help. But he also couldn't ignore the possibility that she was in immediate danger. That evening, Marcus called Jessica again. I think I made things worse, he told her, explaining what had happened with David's visit to the cafe. You didn't make things worse, Jessica said firmly. The abuser made things worse by escalating the violence. That's what they do when they feel like they're losing control. But if I hadn't asked questions, then Sarah would still be suffering in silence, and no one would know to look out for her. Marcus, when abusers escalate, it often means the victim is getting closer to leaving. The abuser senses that and tries to reassert control. What should I do now? Be ready to help when she asks for it. And trust me, if David is as controlling as he sounds, Sarah is going to realize that she has to make a choice between staying safe and staying married. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about the look in Sarah's eyes when she'd said goodbye, and about David's threatening demeanor. He worried that Sarah was suffering consequences for their workplace conversations, and he felt responsible for any additional harm that might come to her. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work early and waited for Sarah to arrive. 8 o'clock came and went with no sign of her. By 8:15, Marcus was genuinely worried. Sarah had never been late without calling, and she'd never missed a shift without advance notice. Marcus called Sarah's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He waited until 9 o'clock, then called again with the same result. By 10 o'clock, he was considering more drastic action. Around 11:30, Marcus's phone rang. It was Sarah calling from an unfamiliar number. "Marcus? It's Sarah. I'm sorry I missed work today. Are you okay? Where are you?" I'm at the hospital. I had another fall last night, and David insisted we come in to get my arm checked properly." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's." "But, Marcus, I need to tell you something. I don't think I'll be able to come back to work for a while. Maybe not at all." "Sarah, what's really going on?" There was a long pause before she answered. "I think you know what's really going on. And I think it's time I stopped pretending otherwise." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and terror. Sarah was finally acknowledging the truth, but the fact that she was calling from a hospital suggested that the situation had become critical. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "I need you to know that Dr. Martinez was right. About confidential medical care, I mean. And I need you to know that the phone number you gave me is in my purse, along with her business card." Marcus understood. Sarah was telling him that she was ready to seek help, but she was being careful about how she communicated that over the phone. "I understand. Is there anything I can do right now? Just don't give up on me, okay? Even if I don't come back to work tomorrow, or next week, or even next month. Don't give up on me." 3 days passed without word from Sarah. Marcus went through the motions of managing the cafe while constantly checking his phone and watching the door, hoping she would walk in with an explanation for her absence. He'd left 2 voicemails on her cell phone, both carefully worded to avoid saying anything that might create problems if David heard them. On Friday afternoon, his patience was rewarded when his phone rang from an unknown local number. "Marcus? It's Sarah." Her voice was quiet and strained. "I've been worried about you. How are you doing?" I'm staying somewhere safe right now, away from David. I called that hotline number you gave me, and they connected me with someone who's helping me figure things out." Marcus felt a surge of relief. "That's good news. What can I do to help?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling. The advocate I'm working with says I need to gather some important documents and personal belongings from my house, but I can't go there alone. David's been calling my phone constantly, and he's been driving by my sister's place looking for me. The advocate says it's common for abusers to escalate when their victims leave. Do you need me to go with you? Would you?" I know it's a lot to ask, but the advocate says it's safer to have someone with me, and I don't have many people I can trust with this. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Of course. When do you want to do this?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. David works Saturday shifts, so he should be gone by 7:30. The advocate says we should be in and out quickly, no more than 15 minutes. I'll pick you up wherever you're staying." Sarah gave him the address of a women's shelter on the other side of town. Marcus had driven past it many times without really noticing it, but now he was grateful it existed. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, fitting the somber mood of their mission. Marcus arrived at the shelter at 8 o'clock to find Sarah waiting outside with a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Karen, a victim advocate. Sarah looked different than he'd ever seen her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Without the careful makeup she usually wore to hide bruises, the full extent of her recent injuries was visible. Her left eye was still slightly swollen and discolored, and there were finger-shaped bruises on her neck that she'd been covering with scarves and turtlenecks. "Thank you for doing this," Sarah said as she got into his car. Karen followed in her own vehicle. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked as they drove towards Sarah's neighborhood. "Scared," Sarah admitted, "but also relieved, if that makes sense. I've been pretending everything was normal for so long that I'd almost started to believe it myself." "What made you finally decide to leave?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Wednesday night, after David brought me home from the cafe, he was furious about the questions you'd been asking. He accused me of telling people our private business and making him look bad. The argument got physical, and when I tried to defend myself, he threw me against the wall so hard that I hit my head and blacked out for a few seconds." Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back anger at what Sarah had endured. When I came to, David was kneeling beside me crying and apologizing, saying he didn't mean for it to go that far. But I realized in that moment that it was going to keep escalating. The next time, he might not stop himself in time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry my questions led to that confrontation. Don't apologize, Sarah said firmly. If you hadn't asked those questions, I might never have realized that what was happening to me wasn't normal. I might have kept making excuses and accepting worse and worse treatment until... She didn't finish the sentence. They turned onto Sarah's street, a quiet residential area with modest houses and well-maintained yards. Sarah pointed to a blue house with white trim about halfway down the block. That's it. David's truck isn't there, which is good. Karen parked across the street while Marcus pulled into the driveway. The house looked normal from the outside. Neat landscaping, a small front porch, nothing that would suggest the violence that had occurred inside. Remember, we're only here for essentials, Karen reminded them as they approached the front door. Important documents, medications, some clothes, and any sentimental items you can't replace. Nothing else is worth the risk. Sarah unlocked the door and led them inside. The house was tidy but felt oppressive to Marcus, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Perhaps it was the way Sarah moved through the space, quickly and nervously, like someone who'd learned to be hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. In the bedroom, Sarah pulled a small suitcase from the closet and began packing efficiently. She grabbed clothes, toiletries, and a few pieces of jewelry. From the dresser, she retrieved a manila envelope containing her birth certificate, social security card, and other identification documents. I've been hiding these for the past month, she explained. David used to keep all our important papers in his office, but I managed to get copies of everything I'd need. Marcus was impressed by her forethought. When did you start planning this? I think part of me has been planning it for a long time, even when I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. The abuse has been getting worse over the past 6 months, and I started having moments of clarity where I could see what my life had become. In the kitchen, Karen helped Sarah gather medications and some non-perishable food items. Marcus noticed a hole in the drywall near the refrigerator, about fist-sized, that had been hastily patched but not repainted. David punched the wall during an argument last month, Sarah said, noticing his attention. He said it was better than punching me, like I should be grateful. They moved through the house systematically, but Marcus could sense Sarah's growing anxiety as time passed. She kept checking her watch and looking out the windows. We should go, she said after collecting a few photographs and a small wooden box from the living room. David sometimes comes home early on Saturdays if work is slow. As they loaded the suitcase and boxes into Marcus's car, Karen's phone rang. She answered it quickly, her face growing serious as she listened. Sarah, we need to leave now, she said after hanging up. That was my office. David called looking for you, and he sounded agitated. He knows you're staying at the shelter, and he's threatening to come there. They drove quickly but carefully back across town, with Karen following closely behind. Sarah sat tensely in the passenger seat, checking the side mirrors frequently. Will the shelter be safe if David comes there? Marcus asked. It should be, Sarah replied. They have security measures in place, and Karen says they deal with this kind of situation regularly. But I'm worried about what he might do if he can't find me. At the shelter, Karen immediately went inside to alert security while Marcus helped Sarah carry her belongings. The building was nondescript and could have been an office complex or apartment building, which was clearly intentional. I want to thank you again, Sarah said as they stood beside his car. I know this isn't something you signed up for when you hired me. Actually, it is, Marcus replied. When I hire someone, I'm saying I care about their well-being, not just their work performance. I'm glad you felt comfortable enough to trust me with this. What happens at work? I know I can't come back right away, but I don't want to leave you short-staffed indefinitely. Don't worry about work right now. Focus on getting yourself safe and stable. Your job will be there when you're ready to come back. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me. You did the hard part. You recognized that you deserved better treatment and found the courage to ask for help. Karen appeared at the shelter entrance and called to Sarah. We need to come inside. David just drove past the building twice. Sarah hugged Marcus quickly. I'll call you when I can. Marcus watched her disappear into the shelter, feeling a mixture of relief and continued worry. Sarah had taken the crucial step of leaving her abuser, but he knew from Jessica's experience that the period immediately after leaving was often the most dangerous time for domestic violence victims. Over the next week, Marcus learned more about the complexities of escaping an abusive relationship. Sarah called him twice, both times from different phone numbers, explaining that she had to keep changing her contact information because David kept finding ways to reach her. He's been calling my work constantly, Sarah told him during their second conversation. Karen had to contact your manager to explain the situation, so David couldn't get information about when I might be coming back. How are you doing otherwise? It's hard, Sarah admitted. Part of me feels guilty for leaving, even though I know logically that I shouldn't. David has been sending me messages through mutual friends, saying he's changed and that he wants to go to counseling. It's tempting to believe him. Marcus remembered Jessica going through similar emotional turmoil. That's normal, according to my sister. She says the hardest part is learning to trust your own judgment again after someone has convinced you that your perceptions are wrong. The advocate here says the same thing. She's helping me understand how the abuse affected my thinking and decision-making. It's going to take time to undo that conditioning. What's your plan for moving forward? I'm working with a legal aid attorney to file for a restraining order. Karen says it won't necessarily stop David if he's determined to find me, but it creates legal consequences if he tries to contact or harass me. I'm also looking for a new job and a new place to live. You know you always have a position at the cafe if you want it, Marcus reminded her. I appreciate that, but I think I need a fresh start. Too many people in that area know both me and David, and I don't want to worry about him showing up there and creating problems for you or the other employees. Marcus understood her reasoning but felt sad about losing Sarah as both an employee and a friend. Will you stay in touch? I'd like to know how you're doing. I will. And Marcus? That first day when you asked about my bruise, even though I denied everything and got defensive, part of me was relieved that someone had noticed. It made me feel less invisible. After Sarah hung up, Marcus reflected on the journey they'd been 6 months after Sarah's escape from her abusive marriage. Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the cafe. It was a Thursday afternoon during the quiet period between lunch and dinner when Dr. Martinez walked in, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was a woman Marcus didn't immediately recognize until she smiled. Sarah looked completely different. Her hair was shorter and lighter, styled in a way that framed her face confidently. She wore a professional blazer and carried herself with an assurance that Marcus had never seen before. Most striking of all, her face was unmarked and healthy, her eyes bright with an energy that had been absent during their months of working together. Marcus, Sarah said, approaching the counter with genuine warmth. I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I wanted you to meet someone and tell you how things have been going. Sarah, of course it's okay. You look wonderful. Dr. Martinez smiled as she joined them. I've been working with Sarah at the Family Crisis Center. She's become one of our most effective victim advocates. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. That's incredible. Tell me about it. Sarah's face lit up as she began explaining her new role. After I left the shelter, Karen helped me find transitional housing and connected me with job training programs. The Crisis Center was looking for someone with lived experience to help with their advocacy program, and it seemed like a perfect fit. What does a victim advocate do exactly? I help people navigate the system when they're trying to leave abusive relationships, Sarah explained. I go with them to court hearings, help them understand their legal options, assist with safety planning, and provide emotional support. Having been through it myself gives me credibility with clients who might not trust someone who hasn't experienced domestic violence. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. Sarah has a gift for connecting with people who are in crisis. She has a way of meeting them where they are emotionally and helping them see possibilities they can't see for themselves. It's rewarding work, Sarah continued, but also challenging. Some days I work with women who remind me of myself 6 months ago, convinced that their situation is normal, that they deserve the treatment they're receiving, that leaving would be impossible or wrong. Marcus thought back to his early conversations with Sarah, remembering her defensive responses and elaborate explanations for obvious signs of abuse. How do you approach someone who's not ready to acknowledge what's happening to them? Very carefully, Sarah replied with a knowing smile. I've learned that you can't force someone to recognize abuse or to leave before they're ready. What you can do is plant seeds, provide information, offer resources, and, most importantly, let them know that someone cares about their well-being and will be there when they're ready to ask for help. That sounds familiar, Marcus said, thinking about his own approach with Sarah. You did it perfectly, Sarah said, understanding his reference. You asked questions without being pushy, you provided resources without pressure, and you made it clear that support would be available when I was ready. That approach saved my life. Dr. Martinez interjected. Sarah's become something of a case study for our training programs. We use her experience to teach other advocates and medical professionals about the importance of patient, persistent support for domestic violence victims. What happened with David? Marcus asked, then, immediately worried the question was too personal. I'm sorry, you don't have to answer that. It's okay, Sarah said. It's part of the story now, and talking about it helps other people understand what they might face. David violated the restraining order 3 times in the first 2 months after I left. Each time, he was arrested, and the penalties got more severe. The 3rd violation landed him in jail for 60 days. She paused, her expression growing more serious. While he was in jail, I learned from mutual friends that I wasn't his first victim. His previous girlfriend had left him 2 years before I met him, and she'd also gotten a restraining order. Knowing that pattern helped me understand that his behavior wasn't about our relationship or anything I'd done wrong. It was about his need to control and dominate. Has he left you alone since then? Mostly. He tried to contact me through social media a few months ago, but my attorney handled it, and he backed off. The legal consequences are finally deterring him, and I think he's also realized that I'm not the same person who was afraid to fight back. Marcus could see the truth of that statement in Sarah's posture and demeanor. The fearful, defensive woman who had worked for him had been replaced by someone who radiated confidence and strength. Dr. Martinez checked her watch. I hate to interrupt, but we have a meeting with a new client in 20 minutes. Of course, Sarah said, then turned back to Marcus. Actually, that's part of why I wanted to see you today. The woman we're meeting with is in a situation very similar to what mine was. Her coworkers have noticed signs of abuse, but she's not ready to admit what's happening. What can I do to help? Just knowing that you're willing to help is valuable, Sarah replied. Dr. Martinez and I are working on developing a network of community allies, people in workplaces, neighborhoods, churches, schools, who know how to recognize domestic violence and respond appropriately. Dr. Martinez handed Marcus a business card. We're hosting training sessions for employers and supervisors next month. The goal is to help people understand how to support employees who might be experiencing domestic violence without overstepping boundaries or making situations worse. I'd definitely be interested in that, Marcus said, taking the card. Sarah pulled a small wrapped package from her purse. I also wanted to give you this. It's just a small token of my appreciation for everything you did. Marcus unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph of Sarah receiving an award from the Crisis Center, along with a handwritten note that read, To Marcus, thank you for seeing what I couldn't see and for caring enough to act. Your willingness to ask uncomfortable questions changed my life. Sarah, this is beautiful, Marcus said, genuinely moved. But you don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. We both know that's not true, Sarah replied. If you hadn't noticed that first bruise and asked about it, I might still be trapped in that relationship, or worse. Every person I help now is also helped because of what you did. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez mentioned something that struck Marcus as particularly significant. Sarah has become a powerful advocate not just because of her personal experience, but because of how she thinks about the role of community in addressing domestic violence. She understands that it takes a network of aware, caring people to help victims find safety. After they left, Marcus reflected on how dramatically Sarah's life had changed in just 6 months. She'd gone from being an isolated victim to becoming a professional advocate helping others in similar situations. Her transformation reminded him that people were capable of remarkable healing and growth when they had access to appropriate support and resources. The visit also reinforced Marcus's conviction that paying attention to the people around him was one of the most important responsibilities he had as a supervisor, friend, and community member. Sarah's case had taught him that domestic violence often hides in plain sight, disguised by victims' creative explanations and society's tendency to avoid uncomfortable realities. A few weeks later, Marcus attended the training session that Dr. Martinez and Sarah had mentioned. The room was filled with managers, teachers, healthcare workers, and other community members who wanted to learn how to better support domestic violence victims. Sarah co-facilitated the session, sharing her story with a group of strangers in a way that was both powerful and educational. Marcus watched her present information about warning signs, legal resources, and effective intervention strategies with the authority of someone who had lived through the experience and dedicated her career to helping others navigate it. During the question and answer portion, a restaurant manager asked how to approach an employee showing signs of abuse without violating privacy or making assumptions. Sarah's response was thoughtful and practical. Start with expressing concern for their well-being in general terms. Ask open-ended questions like, "How are things going for you?" Or, "Is there anything you need support with?" Provide information about resources without requiring them to admit they need help. Most importantly, be consistent in showing that you care and that support is available when they're ready. Another participant asked about the role of co-workers in these situations. "My friend has bruises and defensive explanations, but she gets angry when I ask about them. Should I stop bringing it up?" "Don't stop caring," Sarah replied. "But be strategic about how you express that care." Sometimes direct questions feel threatening to someone who's not ready to acknowledge abuse. Instead, focus on maintaining the friendship, being a consistent positive presence, and sharing information about resources in casual ways. Marcus found himself nodding along with Sarah's advice, remembering his own learning curve and figuring out how to help her without pushing too hard. After the training, Marcus approached Sarah. "That was incredibly powerful. How does it feel to share your story that way?" "It's still difficult sometimes," she admitted, "but it's also empowering. Every time I tell my story, I hope it helps someone recognize their own situation or gives them courage to help someone they're worried about." "Have you heard back from any of the people you've worked with as an advocate?" Sarah smiled broadly. "Actually, yes. 3 of my former clients have contacted me in the past month to share updates. One finished college and got a job in her field. Another remarried someone who treats her well. The third started her own small business. They're all rebuilding their lives in different ways, but they're all safe and free." Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction hearing about these success stories. Each represented a life that had been transformed through intervention and support. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Are you thinking about dating again, or is that still too complicated?" Sarah laughed. "I'm taking things very slowly. The Crisis Center requires all advocates to participate in ongoing counseling to make sure we're processing our own experiences healthily while helping others. My therapist says I've made remarkable progress, but that I should continue focusing on my own healing and growth for now." That sounds wise. It is. I'm learning to recognize what healthy relationships look like, both romantically and in friendships. For so long, I thought David's controlling behavior was normal, even caring. Now I can see the difference between someone who loves you and someone who wants to possess you. As they walked toward the parking lot, Sarah mentioned that she was considering going back to school to get formal training in social work or counseling. "The Crisis Center would help pay for my education, and having professional credentials would allow me to help people in even more comprehensive ways," she explained. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "It's exciting and scary at the same time," Sarah said. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine having any control over my own life. And now I'm making plans for a future that I'm actually looking forward to." Marcus hugged Sarah goodbye, marveling at the journey they'd both taken since that first morning when he'd noticed a bruise on her jaw. Her transformation had been remarkable, but it had also changed him. He'd become more observant, more willing to ask difficult questions, and more committed to being part of the solution when people around him were struggling. 6 months later, Marcus received a graduation invitation in the mail. Sarah had completed an accelerated program in social work and was being honored as the outstanding student in her class. The ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon, and Marcus made sure to attend. Watching Sarah walk across the stage to receive her degree, Marcus reflected on the power of human resilience and the importance of community support in overcoming trauma. Sarah's journey from victim to survivor to advocate demonstrated that with appropriate help, people could not only heal from severe abuse, but could transform their experience into a force for helping others. After the ceremony, Sarah found Marcus in the crowd. "I'm so glad you came," she said, beaming with pride. "I have some exciting news to share." "What's that?" "The Crisis Center has offered me a promotion to program coordinator. I'll be overseeing all of our victim advocacy services and developing new community outreach initiatives." "That's fantastic. You've earned it. I also wanted to tell you that I'm getting married next spring." Marcus's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's wonderful news. Tell me about him." Sarah's face glowed with happiness. "His name is Robert, and he's a teacher at the elementary school where I do educational presentations about healthy relationships. He's patient, kind, and respectful. Most importantly, he supports my work and understands my history without trying to fix or change me." "How did you know he was different from David?" "Robert encourages my independence instead of trying to control it. He's proud of my work and my education rather than threatened by them." When I told him about my past, his response was admiration for my strength, not pity for my victimization. Marcus felt happiness for Sarah, but also a sense of completion. Her story had come full circle from abuse to freedom to love, and she'd become a powerful advocate for others along the way. As the graduation celebration wound down, Sarah pulled Marcus aside for a final conversation. "I want you to know that everything good in my life now traces back to that morning when you asked about my bruise," she said seriously. "Your willingness to care about a coworker's well-being set in motion a chain of events that not only saved my life, but led to my ability to help dozens of other women find safety and freedom." "You would have found your way out eventually," Marcus said. "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but maybe not. And even if I had, it might have taken much longer, and I might not have survived the escalation that was happening. You intervened at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way." Marcus looked at this confident, educated, happy woman and marveled at her transformation. "What do you want people to learn from your story?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I want them to understand that domestic violence can happen to anyone, and that victims aren't weak or stupid for staying in abusive relationships. I also want them to know that small acts of caring and awareness can save lives. Most importantly, I want them to realize that recovery and transformation are possible with the right support." As they parted ways that day, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of observation and concern had led to such profound change. Sarah's bruise had been a cry for help that she couldn't voice herself, and his decision to notice and respond had made all the difference. The experience had taught Marcus that being part of a community meant paying attention to the people around him and being willing to act when someone needed help. It had also shown him that healing from trauma was possible and that survivors could become powerful advocates for others facing similar challenges. Years later, Marcus would think back on this journey whenever he noticed signs of distress in the people around him. He'd learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply to see them, to care about their well-being, and to let them know that help is available when they're ready to accept it. Sarah's story had begun with a bruise that wasn't there yesterday, but it had ended with a life rebuilt on foundation of safety, respect, and purpose. It was a reminder that even in the darkest situations, hope and transformation were possible when people cared enough to get involved. Rough together. It had started with a simple observation about a bruise, but it had led to someone escaping a potentially life-threatening situation. He thought about how easy it would have been to ignore the warning signs, to accept Sarah's explanations at face value, or to decide that it wasn't his place to get involved. Marcus also thought about the role that other people had played in Sarah's escape. Dr. Martinez had provided medical perspective and resources. Karen had offered professional advocacy and guidance. The shelter staff had provided safe housing and security. Even Marcus's sister Jessica had contributed by sharing her own experience and advice. It had taken a community of people to help Sarah find her way to safety, which made Marcus realize how many victims might be suffering in isolation without access to that kind of support network. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a text message from Sarah's new phone number. Started a new job at a nonprofit organization that helps domestic violence survivors. Thought you'd like to know I'm using my experience to help other people in similar situations. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Marcus smiled as he read the message. Sarah had not only escaped her abusive situation but had found a way to transform her trauma into a tool for helping others. It was the best possible outcome for what had started as a troubling observation about a co-worker's unexplained injury. The experience changed how Marcus approached his role as a manager and as a member of his community. He became more attuned to signs of distress in the people around him, more willing to ask uncomfortable questions when someone's well-being might be at stake. He also kept Dr. Martinez's business card and information about local domestic violence resources easily accessible at the cafe, hoping that if another employee or customer found themselves in Sarah's situation, they would have immediate access to help. Most importantly, Marcus learned that sometimes the most significant help you can offer someone is simply paying attention and caring enough to ask questions when something doesn't seem right. That first observation about Sarah's bruise had saved her life, not because Marcus was a hero or an expert on domestic violence, but because he noticed something troubling and refused to ignore it. The bruise had been a warning sign, but it had also been an opportunity for intervention, for support, and ultimately for transformation. By recognizing that opportunity and acting on it, Marcus had helped Sarah find her way from victim to survivor, and from isolation to empowerment. The bruise that had started this journey was just the visible sign of a much deeper problem. But now at least Sarah was ready to address that problem with the help and support she deserved. Marcus spent the rest of the day researching local resources and making sure he had current contact information for domestic violence services. He also spoke with his manager about the possibility of holding Sarah's job open if she needed extended time away from work to address her situation safely. Whatever happened next, Marcus wanted to make sure that Sarah had options and support available when she was ready to use them. The road ahead would likely be difficult and dangerous, but at least Sarah wouldn't have to travel it alone. Talk to someone who understands these situations, or if you ever need help staying safe, they're there. No judgment, no pressure. Sarah took the paper and looked at it for a moment before folding it small and putting it in her pocket with Dr. Martinez's business card. Thank you, she said quietly, then hurried out to her car. Marcus watched her drive away and hoped that planting these seeds of possibility would eventually help Sarah find the courage to seek help. He knew from Jessica's experience that change often happened slowly, and that victims needed to reach their own conclusion about what they could and couldn't tolerate. But at least now Sarah knew that help existed, and that she had people in her life who cared about her well-being. Whether she chose to use those resources would ultimately be her decision, but Marcus was committed to making sure the option remained available to her. As he locked up the cafe that evening, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and anxiety about what tomorrow might bring. Sarah was starting to acknowledge that her situation wasn't normal, but that realization could also make her home life more dangerous if her husband sensed that she was questioning their relationship dynamics. Marcus knew that the coming days and weeks would be crucial in determining whether Sarah found the strength to seek help or whether fear would drive her deeper into isolation. Either way, he was determined to be there for whatever came next. Better, she said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus decided to take a different approach. Instead of focusing on the bruise or asking direct questions about her home life, he would try to build trust and let Sarah know that help was available if she wanted it. He would be patient, observant, and ready to act when the time was right. As the morning progressed, Marcus found subtle ways to check in with Sarah without making her feel pressured. He made sure she had regular breaks, offered to handle the more physically demanding tasks, and created opportunities for private conversation if she wanted to talk. But Sarah remained guarded, sticking to her story about the bathroom door and deflecting any expressions of concern. Marcus realized that this was going to be a longer process than he'd initially thought. Sarah wasn't ready to trust him with the truth yet, and pushing too hard might drive her away entirely. Still, Marcus was determined to be there for her. He'd failed to help Jessica in time, but maybe he could make a difference for Sarah. The bruise on her jaw was just the beginning of what he suspected was a much larger problem, and he wasn't going to ignore the warning signs this time. As the day continued, Marcus kept watching, waiting, and hoping for an opportunity to help Sarah find a way out of whatever situation had put that bruise on her face. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and it might take time, but he was committed to being part of the solution rather than another bystander who chose not to get involved.